Hello everyone, GoldenNova here. It's the spookiest time of the year, so for this month's theme, we're going to be focusing on some residents of the underworld. Whether they be stewards of the Stygian abyss or wandering souls of lost warriors, we're covering them for Spooky Month. And the first theme we're going to be covering is... well, one sec, I know what y'all want to see.
Secrets of Eternity was released in January 2015. This set introduced the Infernoids, a series of monsters that can special summon themselves to the field by banishing other Infernoids from either the hand or graveyard. Notable cards in this set include Farfa, Malabra...
There you go, enough of that. Now, while I'd be hard-pressed to call this theme top tier during its time, it was certainly a massive skill check, undermining any duelist it ran up against who weren't prepared to deal with their seemingly bottomless well of resources, powerful control elements, and superb graveyard hate. And I know this from personal experience, as someone from my locals basically one-tricked this at the height of their power, and it was scary. So, without further ado, let's boot up our systems to engage our mechanical demons, examine the details of these devils, then see what companions to meet and which to avoid. It's time to get deep into the tank with Infernoid. But before we continue, make sure to subscribe to the channel if you enjoy what I do. Once we get to 40k, we're doing our next 5Ds video on Leo and Luna, and every sub helps. Also, check out my Discord, where we've got a little bit of that One Piece fever, and my Twitch, where you can watch me put all my lessons to the test live with viewer duels. And if you want to go that extra mile, join my Patreon, where you can get my videos early and help us reach these video milestones. Thank you all so much for watching, and now, back to the video. So, what's the deal with Infernoids? Well, they're a series of fire attribute fiend type monsters that are one of the major antagonists of the post-Duelist Alliance dual terminal story, and a majority of them can't be normal summoned or set, and can only be special summoned by banishing a certain number of other Infernoids from your hand or grave, with the number of cards you need to banish and where you can summon them from depending on their level, and they can't be special summoned by other ways, though there are a variety of support cards that just ignore summoning conditions. They can also only be summoned if the total levels and ranks of all effect monsters you control equal 8 or less, a restriction I imagine was put in place to keep you from spamming a whole gaggle of them onto the field, because I'm still struggling to figure out what the lore reason for that would be. The number 8 is pretty prevalent in the Albaz lore, but until I can find a way to connect that specifically to Qliphoths, Infernoids, and Tierra, I'm at a bit of a loss. A majority of them also have a quick effect where you contribute a monster, then target a card in your opponent's grave and banish it. That's right, any of your monsters can become a DD Crow, which isn't just powerful in any graveyard-centric meta, but was also incredibly thematic since it was useful against a number of other dual terminal archetypes. It got Shaddoll fusions out of the grave so they couldn't be recycled, deprived Nekroz of their ritual mirrors before they could activate their grave effects, any Satellar Knights that were about to be summoned were just whisked away to the Shadow Realm, all kinds of stuff. And let's not forget that by being able to tribute at quick effect speed, you can dodge targeted interaction or anything that applies on the field like skill drain, which is pretty neat. But first, let's cover the Infernoid that breaks a ton of these rules, Infernoid Decatron, a level 1 tuner monster, love to see it, with 500 attack and 200 defense. It doesn't have the inherent summon ability of the rest of the Infernoids, nor the effect to banish. And yet, somehow it's one of the best cards in the entire theme. If this card is normal or special summoned, you can send any Infernoid monster from your deck to the grave, except a copy of itself, and if you do, increase the level of this card by the level of the sent monster. And if you do, this card's name becomes that monster's name, and replace this effect with that monster's original effects. This makes Decatron great at any stage of the game. It gets your game plan started because you can set up any Infernoid while getting its effect while loading it into the grave, and in the late game you can summon this even when you've reached your level cap. Trust me, it's a ton of help. Alright, back to our regularly scheduled Noid templating. First, we have our level 1 through 4 monsters, and they can be summoned from the hand by banishing one Infernoid from your hand or grave. And their grave banishing effect can only be used on your opponent's turn. First is Pure Mace, a level 1 monster with 0 attack and defense, and once per turn you can target a set card on the field and shuffle it into the deck. And the targeted card can be activated in response to this card's activation. So they slapped a Night Beam onto a monster, but it shuffles into the deck instead of destroying to avoid any grave triggers. It also has the added bonus of being able to go after monsters in face-down defense position, which is very good since 0 attack isn't going to run over anything. Because of that, it's not going to survive very many battle phases, but you can use its banishing effect to tribute it off the field, or make it into a Linkuriboh, which is actually a boost to your overall offensive power, at which point you now have an Infernoid in grave for your other summons. This little devil may not have much bulk, but it's more than ready to cause some impsidence. Infernoid Antra is a level 2 monster with 0 attack and 2000 defense, and once per turn you can target a face-up card your opponent controls and return it to the hand. Yeah, our last monster was Nightbeam, now we have a compulsory evacuation device. Okay, not exactly, this effect is only at spell speed 1 and can only hit face-up cards, not any monster, but this does mean annoying face-up spells and traps can be targets. While Gozen Match and Rivalry of Warlords are great matches for us, there can be only one is positively devastating, so having an answer to it is paramount. Now, it might not seem like they have the kind of power to lift cards like that, but you know what they say about the proportional strength of Antras. Infernoid Harmadic is a level 3 monster with 1600 attack and 0 defense, and once per turn you can target a monster on the field and destroy it, but this card can't attack the turn you activate this effect. Yeah, no fuss, no muss, just find a monster and take it off the field. And while you can't attack the turn you use this, losing out on 1600 isn't exactly something to cry about, especially because we can just fold this into a rank 3, or link it off into something that can attack. So it might seem like a bit of an inconvenience, but if you work with it, you'll find that it's a great way to break a board. After all, no harma, no foul. Infernoid Patrulia is a level 4 monster with 1800 attack and 0 defense, and once per turn you can target a spell or trap card on the field and destroy it, but this card can't attack the turn you activate this effect. This is very similar to Harmadic, but does fulfill a helpful function. Pure Mace can only deal with set spells and traps, and Antra can only do the same for face-up ones. But if you get the incorrect one to deal with a given situation, you don't have an answer, like having Pure Mace for a face-up Floodgate. Patrulia can hit any spell or trap card, even your own if that's something that'll help you, so you won't have to worry about having the wrong effect for any given back row. So, for your preparedness, make sure to give yourself a Patrulia on the back. Alright, now it's time for our next category of Infernoids, the level 5s through 8s. They need you to banish 2 Infernoids for their inherent summon, but they can be summoned from the hand or grave. This means that, even when destroyed, they can be deployed from the grave once you have enough material, so they can launch their attacks against your opponent again and again. Also, their grave banishing effect can be used during either player's turn, not just your opponent's, so you can deal with your opponent's grave twice as often, and makes it even better for dodging interaction. First is Infernoid Piety, a level 5 monster with 2200 attack and 0 defense, and when this card inflicts battle damage to your opponent by attacking an opponent's monster, you can send a random card from your opponent's hand to the grave. Easily the most underwhelming of all the Infernoids. Only being able to cause the discard through battling an actual monster, instead of allowing it to trigger on any battle damage, is really lame. If this was a stronger hand rip effect, say being able to see your opponent's hand or shuffling the card back into the deck, then I'd be more willing to look the other way. And to its credit, it does avoid discard triggers by sending the card, but hoping that you'll get a lot of value out of this card is very piety in the sky thinking. Infernoid Sajit is a level 6 monster with 2400 attack and 0 defense, and when this card declares an attack, you can banish a card from your opponent's extra deck, their choice. Now this doesn't do anything outright, heck, you don't even get to choose the most impactful card in their extra deck, but over time, this effect will add up, and will affect a lot of your opponent's choices moving forward. If they don't care about their extra deck, then of course this won't do anything, but if they've built their extra deck in such a way as to minimize the chances of extravagance banishing a card they don't want to lose, or have set aside enough space for fodder cards to banish off of Prosperity, then throwing a few banishes they didn't expect into the mix is gonna make those cards a lot more dangerous and less effective, and eventually they won't have any extra cards at their disposal. Infernoid Saint Samus is a level 7 monster with 2600 attack and 0 defense, and if this card attacks an opponent's monster, this effect can be activated at the end of the battle phase, banishing 1 card on the field. Now that's some crispy removal. The rest of our level 5 through 8 monsters have been a little lackluster in this regard, but now we're getting some non-targeting banishing removal of any card on the field at the low cost of attacking with a big monster. My heart's getting the same warm, fuzzy feelings as when I run into an opponent with a Geyseris after I blasted their field, swapping it out for 2 monsters for even more value. I love the battle phase. Infernoid Atondel is a level 8 monster with 2800 attack and 0 defense, and when this card destroys an opponent's monster by battle and sends it to the grave, you can activate this effect. This card can make a second attack in a row. Not super flashy, but having a second attack stapled onto a 2800 attack monster ain't too shabby. Pair this with Dual Little Chimera and you're looking at a 3300 double attacker, a stat that's contested by very few monsters. And heck, if your opponent only has a single monster, you're allowed to use that second attack directly, which is very spiffy. So if you need a solution to a monster-clogged board, then this monster is going to be a special Aton delivery. Alright, now it's time for the final category of our main deck Infernoids, level 9 and level 10. They can also be summoned from the hand or grave, but require 3 Infernoids to be banished. However, they lack the Tribute to Banish effect, though thankfully it's replaced by something way cooler, and can still only use their inherent summoning abilities if the total level and rank of all effect monsters you control are 8 or below. So once you summon either of these, you're basically shutting yourself off of summoning any Infernoid, so that's something. Infernoid Deviati is a level 9 monster with 2900 attack and defense, and when this card is special summoned, you can destroy all spell and trap cards on the field except void cards, the support cards of choice for the Infernoid horde. And once per turn, when another monster's effect is activated as a quick effect, you can tribute a monster to negate the activation, and if you do, banish it. Yeah, that's right, we've got a Heavy Storm and a monster negate that banishes, all of which is stapled onto a gigantic body. And if it seems like it's missing some coverage, don't worry, because Deviati has a counterpart that'll make up for it. Infernoid Anunku is a level 10 monster with 3000 attack and defense, and when this card is special summoned, you can destroy all other monsters on the field, though this doesn't make any allowances for other Infernoid monsters like Deviati does for void spell and trap cards, so keep that in mind. And during either player's turn when a spell or trap card is activated, you can tribute a monster to negate the activation, and if you do, banish that monster. Now, because of the summoning restriction, it's almost impossible to get both on the field active at the same time. The only way I can think of, using the card pool we've talked about so far, is summoning Decatron to mimic one of them after you summon the other. But outside of that, if you find that you need the other's negation or board wipe effect, you can tribute them for their own negation effect to open up room, either for the other big boss or for a multitude of smaller Infernoids. What can I say? There are 10, but they cause the irrevocable destruction of the dual terminal world. But that's not all, because we've got a fusion monster as well, Infernoid Tierra, a level 11 monster with 3400 attack and 3600 defense, requiring Infernoid Anunku, Deviati, and 1 or more Infernoid monsters as material. And when fusion summoned, you can apply the following effects, depending on the number of fusion material with different names used for this card's summon. With 3 or more, each player sends 3 cards from their extra deck to the grave. With 5 or more, each player sends the top 3 cards from their deck to the grave. With 8 or more, each player returns 3 of their banished cards to the grave. And with 10 or more, each player sends their entire hands to the grave. Now, that requires a lot of fusion material, but would you believe me if I said that this was the deck's best play starter? We have a fusion effect that makes this easy peasy, and while your opponent might benefit from getting to mill cards or put banished cards back into their grave, you'll likely be benefiting even more. It's a really big master plan play, but I expect nothing less from one of the dual terminal's twin goddesses. Getting a lot of Shin Megami Tensei vibes here. Alright, that's all the Infernoid monsters, now it's time for the Void spells and traps that support the theme. Void Seer is a quick play spell that targets an Infernoid monster you control, and that target is unaffected by your opponent's card effects this turn. And if any number of Infernoid monsters you control would be destroyed by a card effect, you can banish this card from your grave instead of destroying one of those monsters. This is an extremely useful protection spell, kind of in the same vein as Spellbook of Wisdom, and to be fair, our bigger Infernoids are a huge investment, so having a way to keep them from just getting picked off the field is a huge upside. It even helps while in the grave as a double dose of protection. And if you're creative, you can even use this to keep one of your Infernoids safe when Anunku hits the board. That way they won't have to suffer that level of searing pain. Void Vanishment is a continuous spell card that lets you discard a card to add any Void spell or trap card from your deck to your hand, except a copy of Void Vanishment or Null and Void, an old trap card from 2006 that has received a name change to Muko via the official card database to avoid confusion, but has also not seen a reprint since that change came into effect, which I would argue is bound to cause even more confusion. But that would involve drastic drop-off effects being good again, so I guess it's a moot point. Where were we? Oh, and when you use that search effect, you can't normal or special summon monsters for the rest of the turn except Infernoid Monsters. And if an Infernoid monster you control battles an opponent's monster, after damage calculation, you can send this card to the grave to banish those monsters. So hey, even your tiny Infernoids can be used as removal by turning them into DD Warrior Ladies. It can also dissuade your opponent from attacking into them, since it triggers on battle, which is a nice touch. The downside is, since they get banished, you can't use them as Infernoid fuel for another summon, though I suppose that means you're just gonna have to make that removal worth it. But considering how telegraphed that is, it'll be a cold day in hell before your opponent lets that go through. Void Apocalypse is a continuous spell card that lets you discard a card to send any fiend monster from your deck to the grave, making this a welcome addition in any fiend deck that loves the grave. So, you know, any fiend deck. Though in theme, it's also a great way to fill up our grave with Infernoids so we can summon them or use them as fodder. And if you discard a high level Infernoid, it's basically the same as having it in your hand. You can also send this face-up card from your spell and trap card zone to the grave to send Infernoid monsters with different names from your hand and or deck to the grave, up to the number of monsters your opponent controls that were special summoned from the extra deck, but you can only use one effect per turn and only once per turn. So you can't pitch a card to Foolish a Fiend and then dump a whole bunch of Infernoids. You'll have to pick one or the other. But hey, even if your opponent only has one extra deck summoned monster, the second effect is more economical, as you don't have to discard. So unless you really want to vent a card out of your hand, Apocalypse can load up your grave with all kinds of goodies. This might be the end of the world as we know it, but with support like this, I feel fine. Void Imagination is a continuous spell card, and while on the field, Infernoid monsters you control whose original levels are 2 or higher become level 1, and all battle damage they inflict to your opponent becomes halved. This solves the issue of not being able to summon a bunch of Infernoids, because now none of your normal ones can ever be a high enough level to get you to that level 8 ceiling. Though remember, it only changes monsters whose original levels are 2 and above, so Decatron won't be affected. And depending on the monster you sent with its effect, that could take up a lot of space. Thankfully, Petrulia can destroy your own spells and traps, so you can pop Imagination once you've assembled all your Infernoids, so you don't have to deal with the battle damage being halved. Or, you know, you could use its second effect, where you send it from the field to the grave to fusion summon an Infernoid fusion monster from your extra deck, using monsters from your hand or side of the field as material. And if your opponent controls a monster that was special summoned from the extra deck and you don't, you can also use up to 6 monsters from your deck as material. So when I said that Tierra was a play starter, it's all because of Void Imagination. By just using monsters from your deck, you can get the extra deck shred and the mill, both of which can provide you with even more Infernoids to use as fuel, because you can send 2 more copies of Infernoid Tierra from your extra deck to help with your summons. And if you're able to invest just 2 more Infernoids into the summon, you get the Banishing Recycling as well. Very helpful if you've already summoned a few to take advantage of the level decrease provided by Imagination. Infernoids may be a tough deck to pilot, but all it takes is a little imagination. Void Expansion is a field spell card, and during your standby phase, you can special summon an Infernoid token, which is a level 1 Fire Fiend monster with 0 attack and defense. And when special summoning an Infernoid monster using its own procedure, you can banish Infernoid monsters you control instead of those in your grave, or any combination of both, allowing you to use the token as basically a free banish for your summons. And your opponent can't target Infernoid monsters you control for attacks or with card effects, except the Infernoid monster you control with the highest level, either if tied. So you get a free resource during each of your turns that you can use to either help your summons or can be tributed for their effects. And because it's a non-effect token, it doesn't even count towards your level cap for your summons. It also provides a bit of a lightning rod effect, which is a really nice way to keep your lower leveled Infernoids safe, which is doubly important because they provide a lot of your utility effects. I gotta say, Pure Mace is a lot better when your opponent can't just walk over it with anything that has a single attack point. But oh boy, if you think you're getting your deposit back on the Naturia Sacred Tree after this, you are sorely mistaken. Eye of the Void is a normal trap card that special summons an Infernoid monster from your hand, ignoring summoning conditions, but its effects are negated until the end of this turn. Hey, hard to argue with a card that gets an Infernoid out of your hand and onto the field, especially if you've already hit that level cap, because if you aren't using their own summoning condition, you don't really have to worry about it, and at no banishing cost, so you can save those for your other monsters. And being a normal trap means you can get it out onto the field with Trap Trick to make it even more consistent. The negation means you can't use either Deviati or Anunku's board wipes or negations, but once the turn changes, you can use their negation effects to their fullest. And, as it turns out, is a harsh but useful lesson for Satellar Knight and Stellar Diamond. It turns out the forces of evil come in attributes other than dark. Who knew? Void Feast is a normal trap card that sends a Void Speller trap card from your hand and or face up on the field to the grave to special summon up to 3 Infernoid monsters from your deck whose levels exactly equal 8, ignoring their summoning conditions. Oh boy, now this was a game changer for Infernoids, I'll tell you what. The usual combo would be to use Void Vanishment to search out Void Feast, set this, then activate it on your opponent's turn, sending the Vanishment to grave to get you 3 monsters. And because you weren't restricted from summoning monsters with the same name, you could summon a Sajit and 2 Decatrons, each sending a Devyati and a Nunku apiece, so you had 2 negates, as well as setting up the legit summons of your boss monsters. But you could get away with way cooler things. Because this is spell speed 2, you could activate a Void card that doesn't normally stick to the field, Void Seer and Eye of the Void come to mind, then chain Void Feast to them, sending that card to the grave, and at that point it's like you get the effect for free. So with this, you can deploy a ton of Infernoids out of your deck in a wide variety of combinations to fit any situation, which means every time you use this, the Infernoid gang is eating well tonight. Void Launch is a continuous trap card, and during each of your standby phases, you can send up to 2 Infernoid monsters from your deck to the grave. And if you control a monster that is not an Infernoid monster, send this card to the grave. That is unfortunate considering that a lot of the power Infernoids have now comes from the fact that you can use cards outside the theme to overcome their inherent weaknesses. So the fact that Launch pulls a Burning Abyss whenever you control anything off theme really bites. Heck, it's worse than Burning Abyss because you can't save them with anything that prevents effect destruction, it just sends. Now if you're only playing Infernoids, this card is great. It's a double Foolish Burial every turn, and you can even pull this off to help you recover from a bad board position. Like if your board is wiped, you can activate this to get the effect, and if you lose it later on because you summoned a non-Infernoid, so be it. But because of how unwieldy it is, especially in the context of modern Yu-Gi-Oh!, Launch really fails to get off the ground. Void Purification is a continuous trap card that also goes to the grave if you control a non-Infernoid monster. Cool. But its effects are pretty neat. During your opponent's standby phase, you can target an Infernoid monster in your grave and add it to your hand. Great for recycling your level 4 and lower Infernoids since they can only be summoned from the hand using their own procedure. And during your standby phase, you can target one of your banished Infernoid monsters and return it to the grave. Great for helping you keep your resources stocked up. It's a really cool card, if only it let you splash in other cards to help you out. Seriously, for not liking Infernoids, this card really shows off a lot of them. Like, there's the Dragoonity Spear, that's Construct and their Annoyacillus, Annoyachillis, Icy mode. Seriously, I'd argue this one barely has any Infernoids in it. Alright, so that's all the Infernoid cards, but what do we do with them? Well, aggro feels like the name of the game. With all these high attack monsters that we can summon, a little creativity is all we need to assemble lethal. We can go second fairly well with our suite of board breakers, but they also come equipped with powerful control effects for when we have to go first. So really, our biggest concern is finding quick and easy ways to fill up our graves so we can go for game. But what can we play to help them out? Well, a big card that saw a ton of play when it was still legal was That Grass Looks Greener.
Uh-oh. Garage.
One could say that Infernoids were one of the big original pile decks, alongside Shit All Good Stuff, shoving in as many good grave cards as possible to bolster the deck count to 60. And if you found either this card or Left Arm Offering to search it, you could walk away with an almost unbeatable amount of grave resources, all while matching the smaller deck size of your opponent, as long as they weren't on a 60 card pile. So now, all the consistency issues of your deck are fixed. But that card is banned, so now Reasoning and Monster Gate are our go-to starters. Thankfully, because all but one of our Infernoids can be normal summoned or set, they'll skip over every single one, and each one we pass means more fuel for us. Unfortunately, both of these cards are limited, but if it curbs Ruin Force OTK, then I guess it's worth it. Another source of mill is Needle Bug Nest. It is random, but 5 cards are 5 cards. we might also want to take a page out of the tier limit playbook and play the Ishizu cards. After all, milling 5 cards is milling 5 cards. Card Trooper is also another useful little guy, because not only does it mill you 3 cards, it's also a monster that you contribute for your Infernoid effects. One of the biggest advancements in Infernoid power, though, was the release of the Layer of Darkness structure deck, most of all being the eponymous field spell. Now you could use your opponent's monsters as the cost for the graveyard banishing effects, or even the negation effects of Deviati and Enumku, giving you some of the best removal the game has to offer. The tokens also make for great tribute fodder, and once again, as normal monsters, they don't count against your level cap. Being dark also has its perks, as you can now link into the Dark Charmer and steal some of your opponent's best grave monsters, because as it turns out, dark is a bit more common of an attribute than fire. You could also use Lilith, Lady of Lament, to help search out your Void Feasts, or a variety of Virus Trap cards, of which your Infernoids make perfect tribute fodder for when Layer of Darkness is on the field. And it's hard to argue against the inclusion of Darkus Diabolos, as it's an amazing monster that's easy to summon. For Fiend-related support, it's hard to go wrong with Archfiend's Ghastly Glitch. It removes any card on the field and sends a Fiend from deck to grave. You can even send Fiendish Rhino Warrior, which provides great protection for your Infernoids while on the field, but can send another Fiend to the grave when it goes to the grave, namely an Infernoid. Fiend Griefing has a similar end result, but allows you to mess with your opponent's grave even more by shuffling one of their monsters back into the deck. This can interrupt monsters sent there as cost from triggering their effect, or just depriving your opponent of a grave monster in general. Any deck that can run Unchained should, and Infernoids are no different. By destroying your own cards, you have a great way to manipulate what levels you have on the field. And your biggest threats are Link monsters, so your level cap remains untouched. And on top of that, Deviati popping your back row isn't an issue if the cards you're destroying are set to Unchained spells and traps, letting you get all the bonus summons. Cursed Necrofear is pretty cool. It shuffles your banished Infernoids back into the deck so you can use them again, and a lot of our Void cards are continuous, so when it revives itself, Cursed Necrofear will be able to destroy a lot of cards. However, if you want to recycle those banished monsters but want to play more cards that don't require as much setup, try the Nemesis. All the level 4 and lower ones can recycle while netting you some advantage, with Keystone being repeatable if you can manage to banish it. And Ashatos can help with that. Protoss is the objectively better card, but that card is banned, and Ashatos can stop Dragon Link, which I always say is a huge plus. As for a silly tech pick, try Thestalos the Mega Monarch. Your normal summon is saved almost exclusively for Decatron, but really a bunch of free summons means a bunch of free fodder for Tribute Inc. With this, you can take a peek at your opponent's hand, which is something I'm told is pretty good, especially after the Red Lotus limit, and deal some burn damage along the way, starting at least 1,000, with a little bit extra if you rip a hand trap. And hey, aren't we all looking for more ways to win in time? And that's all I have to say about Infernoids. They're a supremely powerful archetype that requires a ton of build around, and while I would love to recommend this, the deck basically folds to a single dimension shifter. Gotta love it when the rogue options are susceptible to the same stuff as meta. However, keep these nasty contraptions in mind, because once the graveyard becomes a safe place to launch your plays from, your opponent is infernoying plays! Ooh, that joke was more tortured than Window was. But now, I want to hear what you all have to say. Are Infernoids the Barons of Banishing, or is their tournament run gonna end the same way as they performed against Zefra? Let me know in the comments, and if you haven't already, please make sure to like this video and subscribe to show your support, ring that bell so you don't miss an episode, and share this video with someone you know who loves Yu-Gi-Oh! It really does a lot to help me out. Today's episode was brought to you by my lovely patrons, including this month's illustrious Quasar Commander Harry, the ominous benefactor, Nebula Navigator's 3rd Dynasty, Adam Zagidel, Avi Chali, Kane Senpai, Cameron Berg, Eric, Frankie, Genesis Yu-Gi-Oh!, Gloomba 331, Great Big Pillock, Howling Zangetsu, Ironic, John Manji, Julius Sneezer, Larakia, Meteornus, Michael Madsen, Mighty Action X, Muzuki Clark, Neo Trinity, Panther J, Rebel King Lucifer, Rem T Bright, RJ the Jank Monarch, Ruxith Sarani, Sophie, apparently, the Fresh Prince of Conair, the Wizard Moose, True Neutral, Xander Wolfensberger and Zyrus, Cosmic Crusaders, Bear Sharktopus Studios, Chaz Ghost, Emily, Eva Padilla, Inblink, Jesus Garcia, KL, Kale the Dragon, King Scarlet Yugioh, Lord Whoop-de-Doo, Manga Pages, Marion James E. Picata, Nitromo, Shooting Star 3300, Star-Lord 777 and the Legendary Raven, as well as the wonderful Starlight Explorers you see on screen now. I'm only able to continue doing this thanks to the support of these lovely people, so if you'd like to be a part of these credits, as well as help me in my journey to cover all of Yu-Gi-Oh's archetypes, please check out my YouTube membership or Patreon links in the description to see if I have anything you'd like on offer. And if you'd like to hear me talk about more lore pertaining to the Dual Terminal world, check out this series on the living lore of the Dual Terminal. And if you want to see two Yugi tubers going at it, check out Noah Jenk and I's latest series, Progression Polls, where your voice shapes the format. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.